This is TWiT.
We've been used to some crazy headlines in the tech world with big numbers, but I don't think we've quite seen anything like the headline that kicked off the week, which is that NVIDIA is expected to invest $100 billion in OpenAI. This is from the Wall Street Journal. NVIDIA and OpenAI, two U.S. giants powering America's race for superintelligence, outlined an expansive partnership that includes plans for an enormous data center build-out and a $100 billion investment by the chip maker into the startup. The deal announced Monday will allow OpenAI to build and deploy at least 10 gigawatts of NVIDIA systems. That amount of electricity is roughly comparable to what is produced by more than 4 Hoover dams, or the power consumed by 8 million homes. There was a great information headline about this. NVIDIA pays OpenAI to buy its chips. And I've been sitting on it for a bunch of days now. And to me, the headline, the whole thing feels a little bit odd. If everything was going so well, why would NVIDIA need to pay OpenAI to buy its chips? Is the circular nature of these investments healthy? Brian, what do you think?
Is it healthy? No, but it does solve problems for everybody involved in the sense that if NVIDIA is feeling like, well, we need to lock down our dominance in terms of this entire ecosystem, we lock down our biggest customer, theoretically, or one of the primary customers, especially because Google has their own chips, Amazon can create their own chips. Everyone can do their own stuff. The only people that theoretically can't, although they're trying to do their own chips as well, is OpenAI. And what does it help OpenAI do? Well, OpenAI has to raise S tons of money in order to continue to live. And so it's a great idea to lock down the money that will allow them to buy the chips that will allow them to continue to exist, and blah, 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 blah. It's great for everyone involved. Now, does that mean that this is sustainable? That's what we're going to talk about for a long, long time. But I think that this is not only a genius move, it's primarily a genius move, I think, for NVIDIA because it essentially keeps the chessboard in place for NVIDIA for, like, let's call it 5 years. And that would be, it's in their interest for, if NVIDIA has become the most valuable company in the history of the planet, in the last 5 years, it allows them to sort of keep the chessboard at least not locked in place, but in a reasonable facsimile of what it has been, so that they can continue to at least move things in the direction that is beneficial to them.
All right, what do you think about this? I mean, you've seen some wacky things happen back in the dot-com days. Is this just another march towards an inevitable collapse?
First of all, let me just say, these people, these cowards, they should just build the Dyson sphere. What are they waiting for? Just go to the sun and capture the energy, like this 100 billion piddly squat.
Here.
So, but short of that, I will just say a lot of people have been talking about the dot-com boom because there was a lot of what was called round tripping back then, where, say, AOL would invest in your startup and then you would take that exact same money and spend it on AOL. And what happened was that when the tides went out, people found out who wasn't wearing shorts. I guess that's the Warren Buffett expression. And in that case, in the dot-com case, there were a lot of times where there was a big company who was making money from a lot of small companies, and the small companies all went out of business, and then the big company had a giant loss. It's a little different in this case because they're both kind of behemoths. So while if there is an AI bubble and it bursts, you might have problems where you might, see NVIDIA, miss earnings because of expected spend that doesn't resolve. I don't think anyone expects, either of these companies to go under, even in the worst case scenario, although you never know. So it's an interesting parallel, but it's a bit of a different dynamic than what happened during the dot-com bubble when it was really abused by a lot of these companies.
Okay, and we're going to get into the bubble dynamics of this moment in our second segment, but I'm curious, first of all, like where is this money going to come from, and what is it going to be spent on, right? Because NVIDIA didn't have 100 billion cash on hand. Now it's going to be, I think, a $10 billion investment to start, and then $10 billion increments as we go.
But Alex, coincidentally, isn't it over the last 3 years, NVIDIA, their net profits were about $110 billion. So essentially, just like Ari was just saying, they made $100 billion over the last 3 years, and they're turning around and doing that?
Could be. Could be. All right, Brian, you're making me a believer here. But at the end of the day,
can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, Dan, I'm going to turn it to you. But I think at the end of the day, what we need, though, is use, right? We need companies, what NVIDIA and OpenAI need is use. OpenAI is just going to make 13 billion this year. It's going to lose 120 billion between now and 2029. So Dan, talk a little bit about what this money is going to be used for. Is it training? Is it inference? And how are we ever going to see these companies drive the demand and the customer usage to make up the money?
I mean, I assume both. I don't have Sam Altman hasn't sent me his balance sheet to tell me how he's going to spend it, but I assume it'll be on both. And I think this is a totally normal thing to do. So, for example, one of our big clients at Every, one of our big consulting clients, also invested in us. Sometimes it's like weird. Sometimes it's a thing that you have to be concerned about. For example, in the dotcom era, and I think a good question is what is motivating that investment or that spend. I think in the case of OpenAI and NVIDIA, the demand for AI is truly shocking. Like ChatGPT is the fastest growing consumer app ever. If you use these tools, especially on an enterprise level, either in the API or, for example, Codex, their coding tool, or Claude Code, Anthropic's coding tool, that there are regular outages because they cannot fill the demand for API use for developers, for users. And I think it feels like a really good bet that demand is only going to go up as things get cheaper and as things get smarter, and also as humans get better at knowing how to get the most out of these models. And it makes a lot of sense to take money from one of your closest partners that's going to supply you with the chips you need to build these data centers to get better aligned with them to do the gigantic build outs you're going to need over the next 10 years. And I think that's a separate question about whether we're in a bubble. Like, it seems really clearly like the valuations in AI are incredibly high and frothy, but there's fundamentally a lot of demand and they need the chips in order to fulfill the demand.
Then why so many caveats? So this is from Spyglass. NVIDIA intends to invest up to 100 billion in OpenAI over time. From MG Siegler, he writes, first and foremost, it's a letter of intent. But the real key is that NVIDIA intends to invest up to 100 billion in OpenAI. That's not one qualifier, it's two. We got intends and up to. In other words, they may not invest 100 billion, they may not invest the full 100 billion, or both, or neither. And the sentence doesn't end there. As the new NVIDIA systems are deployed. In other words, this investment has stipulations. It seems like this happens so often with OpenAI that there are these big announcements, 100 billion with NVIDIA, 500 billion for Stargate. And then once the headline fades away, everyone looks at the fine print and they say, wait a second here, that's not quite what you told us.
I think that's a totally legit criticism. And it seems like NVIDIA is making a $10 billion investment and then they have the option to do more. And so there is something real here of substance that is meaningful that OpenAI is going to need, that they're going to have, they're going to need to hit a lot of things, get a lot of things right in order to unlock more of the investment if that ever comes. I think is totally true. It's clear that they really want these gigantic big headline numbers. And in the same way that if you're a startup getting acquired, you're going to want to say the biggest number you possibly can. It includes all of the incentives and all of the, if the stock price goes up and all that kind of stuff. And I think that, OpenAI is playing that game a bit, but I think they're, $10 billion is not nothing. So there is definitely substance there.
Yeah,
All right, Brian.
I'll jump in here for
go
one
ahead.
second,
Go ahead, Ari.
which is, There's a lot of variables moving around. They want to lock in. The two sides both want to lock in certain variables, right? OpenAI wants to lock in its valuation potentially at the peak and say, like, you're going to invest at this level. And then secondly, OpenAI wants to lock in the ability to buy certain amounts of capacity from NVIDIA, which presumably, because they're an investor, they would be able to. In contrast, if they didn't do this deal, like, and they anticipated buying, say, $10 billion worth of chips a year for the next couple of years, they would have to take the risk of raising that much money potentially at a lower valuation or in some other environment. So they lock in the valuation, they lock in the supply, and NVIDIA gets this huge benefit, which is they get to put in sales, and it's great for their stock price as well.
All right, Brian, you mentioned that NVIDIA didn't want anybody, they didn't want the competitor chips to get a heads up because of OpenAI potentially going there. This is also from Spyglass. OpenAI is said to be working on their own chips, undoubtedly not a full-on NVIDIA replacement, at least not anytime soon, but still, if they can move some of their workloads off NVIDIA's stack, that's a huge story. You also, of course, have Google working on their own chips, Amazon working on their own chips. How much of this is just NVIDIA's being a little bit nervous that, as we move into more specialized AI workloads, there might be others that can provide what it provides?
I think if we're only looking at it from the NVIDIA side, that's the only story here, is that NVIDIA is trying to make sure the moat still has water in it. And they like the idea that, at least at this point, they are the only game in town in terms of as long as everyone is supply constrained, they're supply constrained for NVIDIA stuff. For NVIDIA's purposes, if there are other alternatives out there, then if it is supply constrained and then, boy, this new chip comes online or whatever, like they want themselves to be the only game in town. From OpenAI's perspective, they need to maintain, for their valuation purposes, for their branding purposes, OpenAI needs to look like they are the leader of this new era, right? For the purposes of, we keep hearing that, Microsoft is having trouble selling their AI to the enterprise because people inside of enterprises are saying, well, we just want OpenAI. We want ChatGPT. So OpenAI needs to maintain the sense that they are the leaders, that they are absolutely the tip of this wedge in terms of what the new era is. It behooves both of them to be essentially Wintel, to be to use the historical analogy of, this is Microsoft and Intel of the 1990s. I think that whether or not, and Alex, I don't know if you mentioned this, but maybe actually this deal is not going to be buying chips. It might be leasing chips, but in the end, it doesn't matter for either of them, because as for their bottom lines, we won't know the real answer for what this means on the bottom line for maybe a year or two. This is really just maintaining the sense of leadership and the idea that both of them are the tip of the spear.
Hey, I hope you've enjoyed this little snippet from a much longer show we call This Week in Tech. If you want to see the whole thing, there's a link down below. And you know what the best thing to do would be? Like and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.